Hello there, so I'm still out here enjoying this beautiful day in the nature, and I'm reading this book, and it's called Urban Shaman, and it's by Serge Kahili King, and I'm so inspired by what I've just read that I feel like I'd like to share it with you. So this is a book I highly recommend. Before we start, I need you to know that this actually was published in 1990. So that's quite some time ago. Just over 30 years have gone by, so there's obviously been lots of changes since this book was written. But there's a lot of things about it which feels appropriate in the light of our current situation. It's called The Fall and Rise of Hawaiian Shamanism. Given that such powers and abilities that the shamans had in those times, people often ask, how did Polynesia ever get taken over by outsiders? Why didn't the shamans prevent it? Since this has direct bearing on the evolution of shamanism in Polynesia, I will answer that important question here. Each area of Polynesia has its own local variations on this theme, but the experience of Hawaii was typical enough to serve as an example for all. As recorded by Fornander in an account of the Polynesian race, in about the year 1200 AD, and this is during the age of chivalry in Europe and the time of Genghis Khan in Asia, a man called Pa'au, a powerfully motivated and determined kahuna — kahuna is a general word used to describe shamans in that part of the world — of the Order of the Coup, led an expedition with a Samoan chief and Samoan and Tahitian warriors to Hawaii. At this time, Hawaii was a fairly peaceful place, with various parts of the different islands ruled by the local chiefs, who were more like the village headmen. The boatyards of Hawaii were busy, and ocean-going canoes travelled regularly for trade and migration between the Hawaiian Islands, Samoa and Tahiti. The Order of Ku, mentioned by Mallow in Hawaiian Antiquities, already existed in Hawaii as a ceremonial priesthood in charge of most of the temples and celebrations dedicated to agriculture, fishing and healing. Until the arrival of Pa'au, the priests of Ku lived in relative harmony with the shamans of Kane and the professionals, the herbalists, astrologers, navigators, boat builders, etc. of the Order of Lono. That's what such people were part of. Life was more than peaceful, it was complacent. If any did suspect what was coming, they would not have been listened to. This was paradise. What could possibly go wrong? Well, Pa'au had a very special talent which, when combined with ambition, was to change Hawaiian society profoundly. He was a genius at organisation. As soon as he landed, some say he landed on Big Island, he established a base of operations with his imported chief and warriors. Then he set about using his powerful personality and organising ability to turn the loyal Order of Ku into a strongly hierarchical and exclusive structure of acolytes and priests. You might have a feeling where this is going. At some point he introduced human sacrifice into the ceremonies for the first time in Hawaii, with the usual justification that, since human life is so sacred, it makes the most powerful sacrifice. As the Order of Ku became stronger organisationally, power became expanding politically with the help of his warriors. As each new area was taken over with the help of the local priesthood, power replaced the headman system and the local chiefs with a new aristocratic system. Whereas before all the land was held in common, now it belonged solely to the new form of chief, who could allocate it and take it away at will. The aristocracy had its own hierarchy, of course, much the same as the feudal system in Europe, and Pa'au made sure that its power over the people was linked inextricably with the power of the priesthood, so that each should be dependent upon and serve as a check for the other. Again, very similar to what was happening in Europe at that time. However, even though he was able to change the rough class system of Hawaii into a more strict caste system, he was never able to establish serfdom. which of course became the norm in most of Europe at that point. The common people were tenants, they were not serfs. The chief did not own them, and if a commoner was not satisfied with one chief, he could move to another area under a different chief. Only two sources gave Pa'au any real or potential opposition: the shamans and the professionals, so Pa'au and his followers set out to eliminate them both. One of the first things to go was the commerce with the other islands of the South Pacific. No more ocean-going canoes were allowed to depart because it was deemed to be against the will of the gods. That's a nice catch-all, isn't it? And any that were arrived were confiscated, so very soon all interchange and trade ceased. Without the commerce there was no need for boat building, so the boat yards were closed down. And of course there was no need for boat wrights and navigators, so those two professions dwindled and their mastery was lost. Since most of the astrologers were also navigators, much of that knowledge was lost too. 700 years before the Iron Curtain descended in Europe, Pa'au had brought down his even more effective ocean curtain in Hawaii. The Order of Lono suffered greatly under Pa'au, and virtually the only ones to survive over the next 500 years until the coming of Captain Cook were the master farmers, the fishermen and the herbalists, who were undeniably useful and posed no threat to the new order. The shamans of Kane were actually the greatest threat to Pa'au, because their teaching was about freedom and individual power. But in a way they were also the least able to resist him. The shamans could and did protect themselves by withdrawing into the forests and the high places, where few others desired or dared to go. However, they could only influence the people in ways in which the people wanted to be influenced, and isn't that always the truth? Pa'au offered absolute security in return for giving up personal freedom and responsibility. Oh, this does seem to ring a bell somewhere. Using fear as a motivation for going along with his way of doing things, my way or the highway. Security was maintained not only by the soldiers of the new rulers, but by a class of executioners, hired by the rulers and the priesthood to go out by night and punish enemies and gather victims for their human sacrifices. The general population went along with this new order, and the shamans were not numerous enough nor organized enough to oppose the policies of Pa'au directly. So they retreated into the wilderness, letting their whereabouts be known only to a few, healing those who could find them by maintaining a very low profile within their own society. By the time of Cook's discovery of Hawaii at the end of the 18th century, the Priesthood of Ku had a rigid hold on the area, even though all the islands were at war with each other. The Order of Lono had lost most of its knowledge and had become practically a minor branch of the priesthood, and the shamans of Kane were shadowy figures in the hinterlands, to be consulted in times of emergency, but otherwise avoided. Only on Kawaii, that's an island, Kawaii, did the shamans maintain any significant influence. And when the brilliant King Kamehameha, when the brilliant King Kamehameha, I'm struggling with this one, Kamehameha conquered Hawaii, Maui, Oahu and Molokai with the help of Western advice and technology, it was the shamans of Kawaii that twice helped prevent him from conquering Hawaii by force, and they used their magic. Kamaku reports that in the book The People of Old, in 1796, Kamehameha set sail with 10,000 warriors across the channel separating Oahu and Kawaii, and it just so happened a strong wind rose and threatened to wipe out his entire fleet, so he was forced to retreat. Again in 1804, this king gathered up over 7,000 troops for an invasion of Kawaii, and they were armed with muskets, cannons, swivel guns, mortars, and armed schooners as well as canoes. This time it was a disease similar to typhoid that destroyed his army completely and prevented the invasion. In Kawaii, the separate kingdom, his account of that period, Edward Justig said, "Throughout the islands, Kawaii was noted for the religious nature of its people and was often referred to as Kawaii Pule O, Kawaii of strong prayers." Neither the entry of Kawaii into the King's Union through negotiation, the disruption and virtual destruction of the priesthood shortly after the great king's death, the arrival of the missionaries, nor the acquisition of Hawaii by the United States had very much impact on the shamans of Hawaii and their way of life. None of these affected them very much at all. Once a number of them did come out of the wilderness to participate in King Kalawa'a's attempt to revive the ancient healing arts, but when the influence of particular activists known as the missionary group became strong enough to force the king to disband his kahuna-led board of health, they suddenly disengaged and disappeared again. Throughout the years of suppression of Hawaiian culture by the missionaries and by the new American economic and political elite, the island shamans continued very much as they had during the centuries of suppression initiated by Paao. Masters at blending in with their environment, they either maintained in the uplands out of sight, or they mixed right in with their peers as apparently perfectly ordinary folk. In both cases their skills were accessible to no one except for family, friends, and those that were really in need. The law in Hawaii, which made it a crime to be or to call oneself a kahuna, had very little effect on their activities. The seeds of change among the Hawaiian kahunas were sown by the social revolutions of the 1960s and the 70s and the 80s. Like other peoples elsewhere, the Hawaiians slowly began to feel again their pride in being Hawaiian, and the bravest among them began to revive and improve upon the best aspects of their ancient culture. Arts and crafts and dance and song in traditional, old and uniquely new styles became popular, and somewhere along the way the law against the kahunas was just taken off the books. As Hawaiian pride grew, so did the activities of the Hawaiian kahunas. However, the suppression by the church and the state had taken a serious toll in that there were very few genuine kahunas left, and there were even few apprentices in the process of being trained. As proud of their heritage as the Hawaiians might be, the churches had still made a deep impression by associating all kahuna law with black magic, and that's a trick that's been played among the populace of many parts of the world in different times. And certainly in the Middle Ages, all the people that were practicing healing arts were very much in trouble, and we know about the persecution of the witches. Right, so that's what they did. They associated all the healers and shamans with black magic. Even those Hawaiians who dare seek out the healing aspects of this great tradition do so with more than a little fear. Nevertheless, their numbers continue to grow, and I'm sure they've grown much more since 1990. Today, however, the great healing, metaphysical and shamanic traditions of Hawaii are being kept alive, primarily by the same race that almost destroyed them completely. And this is a really interesting irony. Without the audiences of the white mainlanders, even the few Hawaiian teaching kahunas would have had virtually no one to teach. A Hawaiian kahuna friend of mine told me that the Hawaiians won't return to the ancient Hoon law until enough whites say it's good. Well, there's a lot of whites saying it's good right now. And another Hawaiian kahuna attended one of my lectures to hear what this Haole kahuna was saying, ended up confirming what I'd learnt and gave me his blessing to share it, while at the same time expressing the strange feelings it gave to hear him, for him to hear this knowledge being so openly taught after so many years of suppression. On the other hand, there are some Hawaiians who feel that these Hawaiian sacred traditions should be shared only with Hawaiians. In the wisdom which is both fortunate and unfortunate, that kahuna wisdom, the huna, is being taught mostly to mainland Caucasians today. It's fortunate because their numbers and their interest and relative fearlessness ensure that the knowledge will be maintained and enhanced. Unfortunate only because the knowledge could be so useful to the Hawaiians themselves in their modern quest for self-esteem and self-determination. At the present time back in 1990 there were less than half a dozen teaching kahunas, all teaching primarily on the mainland. Only one of those is of the Order of Ku, and he also happens to be a white, that's it, Haole. That teacher is the author of this book. None of the remaining kahuna shamans that I know of have any desire to teach back in 1990, but at least kahunas of other orders are starting to come forward and to share their healing skills and knowledge. I do have great hopes for the few Polynesian apprentices I have, yet we seem to be moving into a period of history where differences are becoming less and less important. Hawaiian shamanism and the spirit of aloha, and aloha simply means so much love, on which it is based, represent a way of life with great value for all of humanity. It is a coming together time for all, and the best use of all shamanism, urban and indigenous, would be the cause for peace, inner and outer. So the coming together of the shamans and the teachers and the healers in the world, indigenously or urban, is bringing about this peace, inner and outer. As an old Hawaiian proverb says, peace is a chief, the Lord of love. May peace and love be our guide and our purpose as we work on healing the world today. And something else did come to me, which is, before I made this film, I was just sitting meditating, and it came to me, I can do the Ho'oponopono cleaning tool for all people that I've had opinions or thoughts or judgments about. I can also do it for my devices and for my car, but I can go even further. So I've been doing I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. And I've been doing this for what people refer to as the coronavirus. I've been cleaning for the coronavirus. I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. Words of power and magic. And then, having done that, extending the cleaning to the mainstream media, extending the cleaning to all of the alternative fear-based views. I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. It starts here, it starts with us, it starts with me, it starts with you. And we are living in extraordinary times. And that's the curse of the Chinese, and that's a blessing of all of us. Thank you very much.